individual 1, individual 2, returns true if individual 1 loves individual 2 at the time and in the world of evaluation, false if they don't. Okay. So that's the notion of content.
Is something less than a complete proposition?
Yes.
Propositional function.
Yeah, it's a propositional function. It's a propositional function and it takes a sequence of parameters. So times, well, it's the standard things, but also individuals. And in the discussion, we can maybe go back to the question of the question of whether indexicals actually contribute anything to content. But so the simple picture, and that's the one that I'll be working with here, is that whether you use I or she or whatever, that's not going to make a difference on the content. The content is just just the property. So one way of thinking about it is that when I say I'm hungry, so the content is the property of being hungry. And that connects with David Lewis's view on the Daisy attitudes. So for those of you who are familiar with the view, Lewis thinks that the contents of attitudes are properties, and they are properties that we self-ascribe. And so one way of seeing this view is that the contents of assertion are properties that, but the difference is that they are properties that sometimes we can self-assert, but we can also assert them about things that we're referring to. So that's the notion of content. So how it works. Let's go back to the examples first that were examples that were motivating Kaplan's view. So those are, in a way, more difficult. Well, they're not really difficult. But so we have Alma who says, I'm hungry. Chris says she's hungry. And Bruce says that's what she said too. So what we want is to have that report come out true. How does it come out true? Well, first thing, both Alma and Chris actually express the same content in the sense that I've just defined, namely the property of being hungry. So that satisfies the first clause. And in addition, it's okay to report them as saying the same thing because they express that content de facto about the same person, namely Alma. So that's like one of the clauses that were listed, which says when it's okay to report content systems. So true report, and that warrants the intuition that they are saying the same. Now the second case, so we are now on that's the fifth page, the last page. The second case is one that you might think is going to be obviously a problem for me, and in a way it's a problematic case because, so if, as I just suggested, if someone says he's hungry, and so the issue of who is being referred to with the pronoun is not part of the semantic content, so the semantic contents are the same, and you would expect that I'm going to have a problem with a case. So if you look at the case, so Daisy, she's pointing at Bruce, and she says he's hungry, and Chris, pointing to Daisy, says she's hungry. So on the proposal about content that I just gave you, the content is the same. It's again a function that takes an individual and returns true if the individual is hungry and false if the individual is not hungry. But if Alma says, if we try to report same saying, the report comes out false, and we don't intuitively think that they're saying the same thing. So how do I account for that? Well, the reason why it comes out false is that if you just look at the report of same saying, where Alma says that's what Daisy said too, it doesn't satisfy any of the clauses that we've had, because so Daisy is not self-asserting the content, and they are not asserting it about the same person. So given that we don't have any of that satisfied, the report comes out false. Even though the contents the theoretical object, the contents are the same, but the report comes out false because of the assumption that they were either both self-asserting it or asserting it about the same individual is not satisfied. So the falsity of the report, as it were, backs up the intuition that they're saying different things. Now, what's also worth pointing out is that you can get them to be reported to saying the same thing if you make it explicit that what was said about different things. So look still at this example. So Chris, pointing at Daisy, says she's hungry, but now Alma, instead of just saying that's what she said too, says that's what she said too about Bruce. So Alma now makes it explicit that when Daisy said what she said, she was talking about Bruce. And now the report comes out true. Okay. So third case is the one where we have Alma who says, I'm hungry, and you report Chris said that too, or that's what Chris said too. So here, as we saw, what we want is the report, as it stands, is to be ambiguous, and so the context will appropriately disambiguate it. How do I get the ambiguity? Well, the ambiguity is that it comes from the fact that, so if the target sentence is something so where the speaker self-asserts a content, there are two ways for that to come out true. Either the other reportee is self-asserting that same content, or they are asserting it de facto about the same person. And that's precisely what we have. We have this long descriptive ambiguity. So if you look at the proposal and how it's spelled out, so the clause A says, well, the both speakers self-assert the content, and the clause B says one person self-asserts it and the other asserts it about that same person. So the first gives you the sloppy reading, the second the sloppy reading. And the fact that you have those two possibilities for the report to come out true gives you the ambiguity. And then the last example was
Excuse me, so just a clarificatory. So you are, the content, according to you, the content is something that doesn't include the speaker or any agent, right? But you wanna capture the difference between he and she and I and you in terms of the specific function, right? The way the function is articulated.
So that's a very good question. So that's what I sort of briefly, when I said, well, we can come back to that in the discussion. The proposal spelled out on this slide is one where you don't capture the differences between he and she and I and all in the semantic content, so the differences are in the lexical meaning, but those things don't actually go into the semantic content. So maybe I can sort of...
So the content, just to get clear, the content of I am hungry, you are hungry, he is hungry, she's hungry is the same.
It's the property, on this view, it's the property of being hungry, yes. And...
Okay, so how you account then for the difference? I mean...
So the difference, the way you would account for the difference in this view is, it takes some time to argue for that sort of radical view because
we have a lot of time here. Though.
But so look, what are the two options? So the lexical encoded information that you get with I is something like speaker group, and with she, salient female, say, and he, salient male, and so on. So those are the differences in the lexical meanings. And now if you say, well, indexicals don't contribute reference to semantic content, you basically have two options. One is to say, well, what do they contribute? Maybe they contribute precisely those lexically encoded constraints or information. And if you go that way, so what's going to happen is that you have to treat that sort of lexically encoded information in a special way because you don't want it to get embedded under modal and temporal operators and exhaustive operators. So, and one sort of example would be to say, well, suppose that Bruce is just about to undergo a surgery to become a woman, so then we'll appoint that Bruce and we say, soon he will be a woman. So you there the so and that's going to be true there. But if you think that the condition of being male is part of the content that gets embedded under the temporal operator, soon it will be the case. So you get soon it will be the case that something like the person who is the same male is a woman, and you get the contradictory content. So then what you need to do is to treat this information that comes within lexicals in a way that enables it to scope out, as people like to say, the temporal and the modal operators, and in addition the negation. So if I'm pointing at Bruce, who is a man, and they say she's intelligent, if you think of she as being the condition of a female, then because Bruce is not a female, she's intelligent is going to be false. But then if you say it's not the case that she's intelligent, but said in reference to Bruce should come out true, and you don't want it, right? I mean, you don't want it to be true to say she's not a woman. No, sorry, she's not intelligent. Said of Bruce to come out true. Right? It doesn't work because he's not realistic. He doesn't see. So then you get. So the challenge is to do something with that information and treat it in a different way. And the solution that people like to take, and it's the normal one, is to treat that material as in terms of a presupposition rather than full-fledged content. So you get to draw the difference within the content between things that are presuppositions and things that are full-fledged content. So that would be one view. And in a paper that's called Semantic Content, where I actually discuss the difference between the two views, I call that the inclusive view. Inclusive because it includes the lexical encoded meaning. And then the view that I'm sketching out here is one that says, well, no, that sort of lexical information, we don't actually need to include it into semantic content, we just leave it as lexical information. So then the analogy there would be to think at other forms of lexical encoded information that we don't want to go into semantic content. And one case that I like as an analogy is the formal pronouns. So in French, for instance, I don't know if you have that in Portuguese, but in French you have a formal second-person pronoun, which is vous, and informal second-person pronoun, which is tu. So I can go to Marco and say, vous êtes blah blah blah, or I can say tu es, etc. So there is a difference in the linguistic meaning, in the lexical meaning. One encodes the information that I have a formally addressing my interlocutor, the other that I'm addressing my interlocutor informally. But people might want to say that that sort of lexical encoded information, though it's at work in communication and in the use of language, is not part of the semantic content. So if we go along those lines, then the suggestion would be to say, well, look, with pronouns, so there is lots of lexical encoded information, namely that you use the first person pronoun to talk about yourself, the third person pronoun to talk about someone else, you use the female pronoun to talk about the female, and so on. But that sort of information, though it's at work in communication, is something that that only comes in at the post-semantic stage, as you might say, when you're trying to decide who to evaluate the content of the truth value. So that would be that would be the view that would fit well with the proposal that it was a very long reply, but it's a very important issue too. So that's right.
I mean, we had about a year ago or 2 years ago, Stefano Predelli was here talking to us about some differences between, derogatory terms and I mean, normal terms. And I don't know, you know his view on that. Would you say that there's something similar to that? I mean,
yeah, I mean that would be like I don't know his view well, but I think the line that he's pursuing is to say that there are non-truth conditional aspects,
right.
but you can sort of give a theory of, well, I don't know whether you would call it semantic or like a formal theory that accounts for those aspects, and that could be one way of doing it. So, and it's not just, yeah, I mean, the derogatory terms are tricky, but if you just look at things like the difference between a term like dad and father, so the one is formal, the other informal. So it's encoded somewhere and it plays a certain role, but it's not in the semantics itself. It's that. So and then so if you compare the two views, so one view that says it's a presupposition, the other one that says no, it's not a presupposition, it's just a post-semantic mechanism. So you get some interesting differences because if you say it's not in the semantics, so you don't get to have truth value gaps and stuff like that, which is in a way nice. And you can also account for the intuitions about the sort of cases that Keith Donovan discussed where you have a misdescription. So with pronouns, suppose that Bruce really, I don't know, Bruce is someone who actually looks like a woman and dresses like a woman and so on, and we are completely ignorant that he's actually a man, so we use the female pronoun to refer to Bruce, and we can say lots of true things about him using she, and we might want to capture that and not say that by the mere fact that he somehow doesn't satisfy this constraint of being a female, all of those things are become immediately either like false or deprived of truth value. So like that sort of thing is something that you can easily capture.
No, I have a question. I'm wondering about the possibility of disagreement in your account. You say that when Alma says I'm hungry and Chris says the same, I'm hungry, they are saying the same. But I can agree with Alma, I'm looking at her, so starting, and I can disagree with Chris. How can they say the same thing if I can take different stance towards what Alma say and what Chris says?
So what I would reply is that so say that what's said, the content is something that stays neutral on who it is about, and when we look at things like agreement, so we care not only about the content, but also who or what this content is asserted of or applied to, and that's why you can agree with Alma and disagree with Chris.
There's not another layer or level of content. Aren't you working with two levels of content here?
No, so
like a guarantee, for instance.
No, well, I mean, so in this project, I'm not denying that there can be other levels of content. So for instance, I haven't said anything about the contents of beliefs, for example, and how semantic content and the assertive content fits with belief content, and then there are contents over which we may disagree, and things like that. So I mean, the project is not to say, well, there is only one notion of content and this one. The question is rather here to just look at the assertive content, and so having in mind other motivations for dealing with semantic content as being some propositional, the thought is to show that that notion of content can reflect the notion of assertive content. I haven't worked on the issue whether it can also play the notion of the content over which we disagree and what happens in questions like agreement and disagreement. But the questions about disagreement and agreement get very tricky because, well, especially like with disagreement, so it's not clear that all disagreements are disagreements over content, so we can disagreements can be also disagreements in attitudes, as it were. So like if I just like something and you dislike that same thing, in a way we also disagree because our tastes disagree and so on. So things get tricky, and I'm not claiming to have a fully worked out account of content that's gonna apply all over the board. I don't think it's gonna be a knockdown problem for me. Because to agree with someone, it's not only a matter of agreeing in content. Just in a way, even like when we report same saying, as I'm suggesting, it's not only a matter of the assertive content, it's only a matter of what the people assert the content about or of. So the same kind of considerations can come into play when we think about agreement and disagreement.
But the reply you gave to him, like we don't care simply about the semantic content, but also about other sorts of. Wouldn't that sort of answer be available to Kaplan as well for the same problem that you pointed out for his account? I mean, look, we might be saying the same thing, the same content or the same character, but we care about something else. Not only the character, not only the content in some situations.
Yeah, so like, and that's what I also, I think, said. I don't know if I said it at some point, but I don't think that these are knockdown problems for the Kupenian view. It's not that I've showed it to be inconsistent or anything like that. It's mainly that the easy solution that he thought he had for what he said in same saying doesn't work as it stands. So then, and that's the question is whether you want to pursue the Kupenian view and say, well, in this case, so in the problems that I pointed out, the reason why we can't report a person who says he's hungry and someone else who says she's hungry, we don't simply report them as same saying. It's because we don't care only about love, we also care about etc. So that would be an option, but then it also needs to be worked out. So that would be one reply. And then the second reply is to say that when you start elaborating it this way and sort of bringing in all the stuff about what who is being talked about, etc., it's unclear whether there would be motivations for Kaplan to hold on to this just binary distinction between content and character. So he might lose motivations for having a well-individuated notion of content in addition to character. He might, some people like John Perry has this view of the reflexive referential theory. So what that view does is that there is not just one content or even two contents, there is a whole variety of contents and the system that sort of tells you how you can generate those contents, so that's a possibility, and maybe that would be something that you would end up with if you sort of, well, it's in a way what Barry's own history was. It was a view that had two levels of content, but it was turned into a view that has multi-layer contents.
These assertions don't seem ambiguous. For example, if I say, I'm not feeling my legs today, and tomorrow you say the same thing, there's no ambiguity because it's impossible for another person to have this varying feeling, because it's an intimate state that only the very person could have and express. In this case, I think there's no problem. This kind of examples, I'm thinking, or I don't feel my legs, is very personal thoughts about oneself.
But so you're saying that if, like I say, I'm not feeling my legs today, and someone says,
someone hear you, and the other day another person said, I'm not feeling my legs, and it said, oh, Anna said that. Of course,
but it's ambiguous between saying, like the first person saying, I'm not feeling my legs, and well, where's the report three? Anna isn't feeling her legs, right?
There are no doubts that Alma said the same, that she is not feeling her legs. She was not feeling her legs. Not that you, because it's impossible for her to know that it was you that had that feeling.
Justification free.
It's a curiosity, because there are different kinds of this assertions.
Yeah.
And hungry, it's a little ambiguous, but not I'm feeling something.
Yeah, but so the issue there is, well, like even if you take something like I'm in pain, okay, so that's like, so how, like would that, you think that that's also like one where you wouldn't get the ambiguity?
Yeah, it's similar to, because it's only the third person can feel the pain, not the other.
Yeah, but so look, I would say that there is an ambiguity, and I think that's what you get when you look at the data. But the question is, so let me try to sort of reply in a way that that really also clarify the proposal. So the proposal says if you just take the report at face value, it's ambiguous. Typically, though, when we make reports, they're not ambiguous because the context disambiguates the right feeling. So then, like when you say, well, there are some cases of this assertion that are not ambiguous, one way of understanding that would be to say, well, those reports are typically interpreted in the, are typically given the sloppy reading, and another one that says those reports can only get the sloppy reading and there is no context in which they get the speaking. Now, I would agree with maybe with the first one that says, well, there is a certain pattern of regularity when you make those reports, but I would disagree with the second one. So if you have like a case where, so Alma says, I'm in pain, And then Bruce hears her, and Bruce says, Alma is in pain, making that assertion based on hearing Alma, so that was sort of a testimony. And then, so there, it's fine to report them as having said the same thing in the script reading, in an appropriate context. So you do get this script reading. Even though Bruce doesn't have his only access to knowing whether Alma is in pain is sort of, well, or not only, but Alma has a different access to her knowledge that she's in pain than Bruce does. And the thought, maybe the Bruce can't really grasp the thought that Alma has when she thinks of herself as being in pain, but still the report, the ambiguity in the report is very fine. So that would be what the proposal, as I've given, it doesn't do is give you the pragmatics of how the context disambiguates, which report it disambiguates a given report that in principle is ambiguated. So something that still needs.
Would you see a sort of similar ambiguity in terms of types and tokens? Like Ludovic says, Rio is beautiful, and I say, Rio is beautiful. You say, well, look, he said the same thing. I said, no. He said his token of Rio is beautiful, and I said a different token of Rio is beautiful. We cannot have said the same thing. Or, of course, you said the same thing. You said two tokens. You see a similar ambiguity here? I mean, not that you have to solve that with your account, but
so with reports of same saying, the ones that target the tokens are very scarce. Well, or like with the same saying. So that if you're targeting the token of the utterance, maybe things like, oh, when did he say that? Means like the that is really sort of targeting the token rather than the type of the utterance, or who heard that, and so on. But I don't think it's a type token.
yeah, it is a type token ambiguity, but what I mean is that if this ambiguity is similar somehow to the one you want to deal with, like he said the same thing. Oh, in one sense she did say the same thing. In another sense she didn't say the same thing, right? There is an ambiguity here in terms of you mean the character, you mean the words, you mean the content. What do you mean, right? And somehow that gets disambiguated in the context. What I'm asking is whether there could be a similar ambiguity in terms of types and tokens, and that gets disambiguated as well in the context. Sometimes we do pay attention to the token is important, but sometimes the type is important.
Yeah, I guess maybe there is. But then I think it comes on the top.
On the top.
I mean, the token, like the token one is something that, it's sort of my account of literates because, I mean, if you have the token same saying, then two people say the same thing. Tokens say the same thing, only if they're producing the very same utterance, and that's something that's, that's not going to happen like, unless in some very bizarre cases. So the semantics I'm using for the same saying sort of implicitly assume that discards the token ambiguity because you have, two different token utterances are reported the same saying. So they're token different from the start.
Yeah, maybe there are ambiguities also relative to properties, not only to subjects of persons. I'm thinking the same. You can have a complete sentence if every part contests dependent or ambiguous. Even the property, I'm hungry, the property of being hungry, it's okay, there is no, but you can have a sentence when the subject and the predicate together form a neighborhood proposition.
I guess so, yeah.
And you have the dysfunction, nothing is permanent.
So, yeah, let me see if I understand. So what you're thinking are things where the content would also need to be evaluated as, a property or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, the property may vary depending on
So what would be an example?
I have to think about it. In the case of I'm hungry, you have a stable property.
Yes.
And you change the person, the time, the goal. But in some cases, there isn't a stable, constant property to apply to different situations. The property itself has problems.
Yeah.
And it can vary on the roles. I don't have an example. Just think about it.
I think that those are the examples are difficult to come up with where, the property is not stable. And I don't think that you would get to report. So, so one case, what one might try to look at is what happens when you sort of keep the individual stable, as it were, but you vary the property. So let's say that I don't know how it would work, but so probably with some like auxiliary verbs like do or so. So you have like Alma who is running, and someone says, well, Alma is doing it, and then in another case, Alma is swimming, and she's, well, with doing actually it's not gonna work, but would the idea be that you sort of use something that the property of
Yes,
what
depends on the
depends on the context, yes. And that's
really fast. What's
yeah.
phase predicates?
Yes, but so I don't know. I mean, the data are not clear there, to me at least. I mean, I haven't looked at them enough to see whether you get such a variety of, like what the variability in properties does. I would need to see the data.
Let me try another example. Let's suppose that Alma and Chris listen to a Bach fugue. Both of them say, "Oh God, that's wonderful." On your account, they say the same thing. There's a property, a function from the center world to extension. But let's suppose that they don't share the same static standard. They don't share the same circumstance of evaluation. They will say the same.
Yeah, I mean that's an easy. I mean that's like there are very few That's precisely like why the contextualism versus relativism debate is how it started, because what people were objecting to contextualists about, static standards would be to say that, well, if it's a contextualist account, then that means that the standards are part of what you said. But two people who don't share the standard say, it's wonderful, and they are obviously saying the same thing. So like the standard line here is that it's very difficult to get the intuition that people who are not sharing the standards are actually saying different things. So I think that's not going to be a problem for me. Even though they might be, the relevant circumstances of, the other one might actually not think that it's wonderful to evaluate it with respect to his standard. When he says that's wonderful, he's actually saying something false, he's just being confused. And the other one is saying something true, but they're still saying the same.
And vague, wonderful is a little vague. It's not subjective.
Yeah.
It's relative.
It's subjective or
No more questions? Well, thank you very much, Isidora.